Let me just deal with a lot of things that Hogan has said. Number one, just on USAID, just one last point. The idea this was some woke lefty department. The left were very critical of USAID for many years. One of the programs that the Doge really undermined was the anti-AIDS program, PEPFAR, George Bush's program. Marco Rubio was one of the biggest champions of USAID, as was the late Lindsey Graham, I should say. So this was not some left-wing thing. Even Republicans used to recognize that aid abroad is a good thing for the United States.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I've got a genuinely spicy one for you today. This time we're dropping into Piers Morgan's show, where Mehdi Hasan and Hogan Gidley go head-to-head over the Iran war and the gutting of USAID. Mehdi comes loaded with intelligence reports and receipts. Hogan tries to hold the line for the White House. And the moment Mehdi asks how a war could be a historic success and require a second war 8 months later, things get really uncomfortable really fast. This one has fact checks, contradictions, and a few answers that completely fall apart under pressure. Do yourself a favor and stick around all the way through, because the strongest moment doesn't land until the back half, and you will not want to miss how it unravels. And before we jump in, drop a comment and let me know exactly where in the world you're tuning in from. I love seeing how far this community stretches. All right, let's get into it.
Well, first of all, let me ask you, because you just brought up the point, what cuts were okay? Did you find okay?
Well, like I said, there were a number of things, I can't remember the exact ones now, but I remember when they were being done in real time, a number of things being reported. Elon was saying them himself, where I was nodding away, going, well, that makes sense, and that makes sense. Yeah, that looks like waste.
But what about Ebola?
Right, but there were so there were certain things in there where I thought, hang on, that seems a risk, a big risk. Why would you do that? Other things seemed a little bit inhumane, a little cruel. But ultimately, it comes down to the question I posed to you, which is, what is America's moral responsibility to the rest of the world? Because on one level, President Trump and you were taking a very strong position in the run-up to the last election, which was America first, America first, America first. No more meddling in stupid wars, like you put it, and so on. Focus on getting cost of living down. Focus on American lives. A lot of people voted for President Trump on that basis, right? But that conflicts with reality. And the reality has been this sudden war with Iran that's proven to be unbelievably expensive, costly to American military lives, is still ongoing, despite we were being told it was all over in 2 to 3 weeks. Here we are, 4 months later. It's still raging. The Iranians, the regime is in place. The IRGC are in control. They control the Strait of Hormuz. They're still firing rockets and missiles at the neighboring Gulf states. All of this is terrible. All of this could constitute, many people would argue, a stupid war.
Well, remember, Americans were taken hostage in the October 7th massacre, as you well know. Americans have been killed by Iranians for the last,
that's all true.
Years in this country, no question. From Hillary Clinton to Barack Obama to Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, they all said Iran can't get a nuclear weapon and shouldn't. Donald Trump was the first president to say, you know what, I'm going to try and do something about it and prevent that from happening.
What has he done to stop that? Because as far as I'm concerned, they've still got every single tiny piece of their enriched uranium, right? We were told last summer in the 12-day war that their nuclear capability had been put back decades, Donald Trump's words, not mine. Right. And yet here we were 8 months later having to go to war with them because according to Donald Trump today in an interview, they were literally like minutes away from getting one and using it. So none of these things, they can't all be true.
But many of them can be simultaneously. Donald Trump and the moves they made at the Fordo nuclear plant and others was one of the most successful military operations, strategic military operations of all time. And while it did
how
set
could
back
it have
the
been,
program,
Hogan? With all due respect, how can that be true and it also be true that only 8 months after that incredibly successful operation, suddenly America had to go to war in Iran to stop them doing what we were told 8 months earlier had been put back decades? That can't all be true.
It's not going to stop them from attempting to gain nuclear weapons, as you well know. In addition, I'm sure there were some sites that maybe weren't struck in that particular military operation. That being said, we know the design of the Iranian leaders. They've been very open about it. The death and destruction of Israel and the death and destruction of America. That's what they want to do. So if Donald Trump can use our military to prevent that from happening, not just for this generation, but for future generations.
Watch what happens the second Hogan gets asked a simple question. Which cuts were actually okay? And he freezes. He literally says he cannot remember the exact ones. Think about that for a moment. This is a man defending a program that gutted entire departments overnight. And when you ask him to name one justified cut, the whole thing turns to fog. That is not confident. That is a guy who was handed talking points and never bothered to check what was underneath them. And then Hogan reaches for the emotional card. He brings up hostages and Americans killed, trying to build this wall of justification for the war. But here is what people don't realize. Emotional stakes are not the same thing as a strategy. You can feel the pain of every victim and still ask the obvious question, which is what exactly is this war supposed to achieve? This is the part that gets me. Even Piers, who is not exactly running a resistance channel, presses on the nuclear claim. Piers points out that as far as he can tell, Iran still holds every tiny piece of its enriched uranium. Every piece. So the mission that was sold as this historic knockout somehow left the exact thing it was supposed to destroy fully intact. And then Piers lands the question that cracks the entire narrative open. He asks how it can be true that the operation set the program back by decades, and also true that 8 months later, America had to go back to war over that same program. You cannot have both. Either it worked or it didn't. And the fact that nobody on Hogan's side can square that circle tells you everything about how thin the justification actually is.
This is a win right now, Hogan. Mehdi, I will come to you. I'm just giving your voice a rest. It needs it. The vocal cords need a rest. But Hogan, where's the win right now? 4 months into a war that Donald Trump said would last 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not seeing a win here for the US unless I'm missing something.
Well, you know already, they've talked about ruining their ballistic missile capabilities with military strikes. The nuclear program's been set back. Their ability to pay for their proxies that commit terrorism all over the world is part and parcel of this too. But as you said, now we're at a different spot. And as I've long commented, that if this appears to be a win, it won't really matter to the American people because it will look like a win. Now, how does that look moving forward to accomplish that? Are we going to have to take Carg Island? Are we going to have to take control of the Strait? I don't know that. They have military experts that have been deciding these types of outcomes for a long time, gaming this out in the Situation Room, the Pentagon, and other places. So I would imagine in the coming days and weeks, what you're going to see is an even further frustrated Donald Trump, because inevitably what we knew was going to happen was that there were some entrenched radical leaders who were committing acts of atrocity, of course, while they were talking to some people in that government that were more moderate. When I believe they made deals with them, it was the radical side that took over, the radical side that began to fire off missiles, et cetera. And I think Donald Trump's pretty much fed up with it. He's had enough of it. And that's why you see the retaliatory strikes, upward of 90, 150 different installations struck over this past weekend.
Okay, Mehdi, I mean, the problem is the Iranians are hitting back. They still appear to be in control of the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump is saying it's open and will remain open. He's now going to do this charge on cargo shipped and so on. Again, those two positions can't both be true, right? We can only go on what we're seeing, and what we're seeing is a very small number of ships getting through that strait, which we know causes enormous damage to the global economic energy market, right? So this is dragged on and on and on. I do think Trump is frustrated. I do think he's pissed off with all this. And I do suspect that if we gave him his time again, he wouldn't have got into this. But he is where he is with it. What do you think is now, in reality, happening?
So, there's the famous phrase, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. This idea that Trump is going to start a blockade again, start bombing again, start threatening Carg Island again, and anything fundamentally will change is absurd. We know that it won't change. We know the two sides are locked into this position. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. We know that negotiations is the only way to deal with the nuclear program. That was what was on the table on February 28th, that Trump and Netanyahu decided to wreck together. And the war is a disaster. Let me just deal with a lot of things that Hogan has said. Number one, just on USAID, just one last point. The idea this was some woke lefty department. The left were very critical of USAID for many years. One of the programs that the Doge really undermined was the anti-AIDS program, PEPFAR, George Bush's program. Marco Rubio was one of the biggest champions of USAID, as was the late Lindsey Graham, I should say. So this was not some left-wing thing. Even Republicans used to recognize that aid abroad is a good thing for the United States.
Here is where it truly falls apart for Hogan. Piers asks him point blank, where is the win? 4 months into a war that was promised to last 2 to 3 weeks. And listen to how Hogan answers, because it is almost unbelievable. Hogan says that if this appears to be a win, it won't matter to the American people, because it will look like a win. Read that back slowly. He is not saying they won. He is saying the appearance of winning is good enough. That is the entire strategy laid bare. Not results, not peace, not an end to the bloodshed, just optics. And you have to understand why that is so revealing. When your best defense of a war is that it can be marketed as a victory, you have already admitted there is no actual victory to point to. Then Piers hits the contradiction that should end the conversation. He says Iran still appears to control the strait, while the White House insists it is open and will stay open. And Piers just states the obvious. Those two positions cannot both be true. One side is describing reality, the other is describing a press release. And this is where Mehdi steps in and reframes the whole thing. Mehdi brings up the definition of insanity, doing the same thing again and again, expecting a different result. More blockades, more bombing, more threats, and somehow expecting the outcome to change. It won't. But the moment that genuinely blows my mind is when Mehdi dismantles the woke department myth. Mehdi points out the left spent years criticizing this agency, and that one of the programs it ran was an anti-AIDS initiative. Here is your history lesson, and it is fully documented. That AIDS relief program was launched under a Republican president in 2003, and is credited with saving over 25 million lives across Africa. Republicans championed it, so calling it a radical leftist project isn't just wrong, it rewrites their own history.
Number two, on terms of the actual war and how it's going, it's funny that Hogan said, well, what about the ballistic missiles? Well, according to US intelligence, Iran still retains 70% of its ballistic missile capability. And the funniest thing about debating Trump people is Trump always throws you under the bus. Hogan's saying ballistic missiles are bad. But I heard Trump say a couple of weeks ago that it's fine for Iran to have ballistic missiles. They have a right to have ballistic missiles. And when a reporter said, wait, hold on, you want Iran to have ballistic missiles? He goes, well, I can't tell them not to if everyone else has them. So Trump is all over the place on this. A month ago, he said the Iranian regime were good people, nice people, smart people, rational people. Over the weekend, he said they're evil, sick people. This is the most erratic man who has ever held any kind of power in this country. And as for going to war, Hogan says stupid war. Piers, you rightly say this is a stupid war. And by the way, he didn't just say stupid war. He said no more wars in multiple rallies. Hogan was the campaign press secretary in 2024. He was there when Donald Trump said, I don't have wars, he said. He said on election night, I'm going to stop wars. I'm not going to start a war. He started this war for no good reason because Lindsey Graham and Benjamin Netanyahu and others persuaded him to do this ridiculous war. And now we're in this stupid war where oil prices are up. He also said, by the way, Hogan, you remember, he said, I'm going to end inflation on day one. We're going to bring prices down. Instead, we've got gas prices going up and up and up because the Iranians know if they hold out for the midterms, it's going to hurt Trump and the Republicans. They have their own incentive for keeping this going. And Piers, I don't know if I said it on this show or another show, but I said, this war is not over when the MOU was signed, when the so-called ceasefire was done.
Yeah, I don't think anybody thought it was. I honestly think Donald Trump is scrabbling to find an exit ramp, and he's finding it really hard because the Iranians...
escalating to exit is not a good move.
But you don't think 47 years of terror and October 7th was a good enough reason to...
So why didn't he say that on the campaign trail, Hogan?
Well,
why didn't he say, I'm going to become president and I'm going to go to war with Iran to punish them for 1979?
Well, actually, I would say, I would look at it differently. Look, you've got a lot of bad actors around the world. You've got North Korea, you've got Russia, you've got China, you've got others, right? And America doesn't march in and attack all those countries for good reason, right? Simply being a bad regime. As we learned...
Also, they have nukes, Piers.
Well, as we learned...
They have nukes conveniently.
I know, that's the point. But the principle should be the same. I remember with the Iraq War debate in 2003, I opposed that very vociferously. Because I just thought this makes no sense. And it backfired horribly and had 20 years of mayhem and led to the rise of ISIS and so on. You don't necessarily have to march in and attack bad actors in regions. Now, I will never defend a thing this regime has done in Iran. They're a despicable, awful regime that oppresses its people, and they've clearly supplied arms and resources to a bunch of terror groups in the Middle East. All of that is inarguable. But my concern from day one, and I said it on day one, is what is the war objective here? Is it to get rid of the regime? And if it isn't, the very last thing you should want to do at the end of this war is empower the regime. And I have a horrible feeling that by working out the unexpectedly huge impact of being able to control the Strait of Hormuz, this Iranian regime now feels more emboldened and more powerful than it did 4 months ago. That's my honest problem with this.
Oh, this is the knockout. Mehdi pulls the receipt that Hogan physically cannot answer. According to US intelligence, Iran still retains 70% of its ballistic missile capability. 70%. So the war that was supposed to strip Iran of its teeth left the overwhelming majority of that arsenal standing. And Hogan was just sitting there acting like ballistic missiles were this big accomplishment to brag about. And then comes the moment I could not stop thinking about. Mehdi says the president himself declared it is fine for Iran to have ballistic missiles, that they have a right to them. So Hogan is on national television treating those missiles as the great danger, while the very man he serves already gave them a permission slip. This is what Mehdi means when he says, these people always get thrown under the bus by their own leader. You defend a position, and the guy at the top has already abandoned it. And here is the part that makes Hogan's whole case collapse. Mehdi reminds everyone that the promise was no more wars. Not fewer wars, not smarter wars, no more wars. And Mehdi points out that Hogan himself was the campaign press secretary. He was in the room. He heard the promise made to millions of people, and now he is here selling the exact opposite. You have to sit with what that means. Iran was living under sanctions, under assassinations, under strikes on its soil, and it never signed up to be anyone's punching bag. When a far stronger nation marches into a region it doesn't understand, history has already shown us how that ends. Mehdi himself remembers opposing that 2003 invasion, the one that unleashed 20 years of chaos and gave rise to a terror group that didn't even exist before. We know this pattern, and Mehdi closes with the point that should terrify anyone who actually wanted peace. This Iranian government now feels more emboldened and more powerful than it did 4 months ago. That is the real outcome. You picked a fight to weaken them, and you handed them leverage over one of the most important waterways on Earth. That is not strength. That is a self-inflicted wound dressed up as a mission accomplished. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.